Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlawn Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlawn Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome, Access to Democracy, back with you with a return guest, a favorite, the COO of Technology for Thomson Reuters, Rick King. And we're going to start this show with a tremendous announcement about the presidential candidacy. Rick, what would you like to say?
About that?
Yes.
I am not running.
We lose.
I run from it.
We lose the top of the candidates.
You're too kind, and you'd be a great campaign manager, but I don't think we'll do it this time around.
Okay, well, I don't know if I'll be here next time around. But
you'll be here.
That's we can only hope. Rick King has been here about 7 years, I think. In that time, he probably has become more a name in the Twin Cities community than just about anybody. You are so involved. I don't know how you find the time, particularly when you have to go around the world so much for the company. But Science Museum, you were a trustee on the board of directors for years. Now I just found out that NPR Radio, you are a trustee on the board. The China advisory committee at the University of Minnesota. You're very active in that and have also been very active in bringing Chinese academics and sending some of our people over there. Your corporate duties here, you've been a sponsor of ours and a good friend. How do you find the time?
I just have good people I work with.
Is that it?
That's the secret to everything, yep. Nothing happens without good people. And of course, you give things that you want done to busy people, and they get them done.
That's true. That's true.
But good people really helps. We have a great team. We have a team of people. Chung Wang is a great person on my team, does all kinds of things with the Chinese community here and also in China. And without him, I wouldn't know anything about China.
And he's written a book, which actually has a page of Access to Democracy in the book.
Right.
Which I enjoyed reading, but I couldn't understand. But
yeah, well, he's one of those rare people who's a Chinese national, green card U.S., U of M law school graduate, so he's got this wonderful perspective of the world.
Now, when the former governor, Pawlenty, set up a high-speed broadband advisory committee, you ended up heading it. The present governor, Dayton, continued with the committee. I think you served on that. You also served on the Metropolitan Airport Commission. And what's your involvement with the Metropolitan Council?
Well, the Met Council has a liaison role with the Metropolitan Airports Commission because all of the transportation aspects of the metro area are more or less supervised by the Met Council. So the MAC, the Airport Commission, has a liaison Met Council member that sits at most of the meetings, and the gentleman up till the recent appointments has been Stephen Chavez, who is the Met Council representative from this particular district here. I think it's going to be a different member because Steve's taken a broader committee assignment, I think.
Possibly yourself?
No, that will be a Met Council person.
Oh, okay. Let's talk about the Met Council.
Right. It's been in the news an awful lot, hasn't it?
And, you know, we decided a month ago that maybe we would talk about the Met Council, and there's been a lot of news about it and columns about it and certainly disputes about it. So when did it start and what is it supposed to do?
Well, you know, I think from a vision point of view, the idea of a regional planning entity was brilliant, and I think that was back in the 60s, if I recall, but I could be wrong about the date.
I think it's going about 40 years now, roughly. Right?
So it was one of the first places in the country where people realized that you couldn't do the planning through just city and town, and you couldn't. It was too broad to do it from a state point of view. And I thought the idea of a regional planning entity was good, and the idea that they would think about various things that where the municipalities would need to come together was I thought a really brilliant stroke.
Particularly, they were focusing on transportation initially, and they still are.
Sure. So, you know, bus service, train service, of course, and since you're crossing jurisdictions, the complication of crossing those jurisdictions and working with all the different entities is not simple. So this was a really good way to do it. The legislature and the state gave them powers of taxation, which is a very strong power in any kind of entity. And the dispute, I think, fundamentally that we hear a lot about today is the idea that it's an appointed body, and the way it's structured is it's appointed by the governor.
And I question that also because it's got 17 members, all appointed by the governor, which has a tendency to make it political right off the bat, whether it's to the left or to the right. But it has tremendous power in terms of overseeing about $1 billion a year, and these are non-elected officials. The counties, the 7 counties that it's supposed to cover, 4 of them have now gone to Washington to and hired a lobbyist or lobbyists to try to get the federal government to really rein back on their powers. And I'm not sure that I disagree with that, because having non-elected people dispensing what is the taxpayers' money is something that's problematical to me.
Well, it's an interesting thing. My guess would be that if we rewound 3 or 4 years ago, there wasn't that much of a movement toward this. What you would see in the legislature, and I'll bring in the Airports Commission in a little bit, that once in a while you'd see something structurally presented that would change the makeup of the Met Council, but not too often. And if the Met Council stayed within certain boundaries that were expected by the elected officials, it was all okay. When then the Met Council, in the view of a lot of the elected officials, stepped beyond what they thought they ought to be doing, then I think you started hearing all this discussion. And really, to me, and it's just my opinion, when they were in the mode of transportation, they were challenging when they were doing a lot of these routings for the light rail, the most recent, the Southwest path. But that's very clearly in their jurisdiction, and they worked with the communities and so forth, and everything's not perfect when you do those things. But I think their blueprint for affordable housing was the thing that struck all these communities in the most strong way, because the communities themselves had a view about how they wanted housing dealt with.
Well, that's the NIMBY philosophy, not in my backyard, and there's no question about it. But there was yesterday in the Star Tribune a scathing op-ed piece about the man who was recently chosen to head the Met Council, who is the husband of the governor's chief of staff. And I would question the wisdom of that, not even knowing the man or his qualifications, but there were apparently 12 applicants for that, including former legislators, people with tremendous backgrounds, people with transportation backgrounds, etc., and they all got passed over for this young man who really has none of their credentials, including academic credentials. That, to me, has a smell test that it can't pass.
Well, and not to pile on, but his previous roles before that were mostly in the political, operative, and fundraising areas. So it's clearly a very partisan selection, which the governor is entitled to do. I mean, that's
Under the law.
Under the law.
Under this law, yeah.
Under the law as it is, and clearly that's one of the elements. And the other element that always is now hit is the fact that the Met Council chair used to be part-time, and the governor, at the recommendation of the previous chair, made it full-time for this for the new chair, and that doubled the salary, which then stuck the governor with more of the issue of the salary raises.
Which is over $100,000 a year.
It is indeed. Yeah, I think it's 127 or 47 or something like that. So we've got several issues. We've got this local issue versus the unelected, regional. We've got at question by some that the qualifications of the chair, and then you have the pay of the chair. And all of these things are swirling, and that generally means, and we've seen a few bills in the legislature to change the way that is done. And the Met Council has enabling legislation that was passed at its inception that set out the way it is. So the legislature and the governor ultimately can decide to change that. And many of the elected officials want to be the Met Council members at this point because they kind of see what kind of impact that can have on their communities.
A lot of the criticism would go away if, in fact, elected officials were part of the Metropolitan Council. We have county officials, we have state officials, even if it was in an advisory capacity, that they could participate. And I wonder about the constitutionality of giving the power to spend so much taxpayer money to unelected persons. I don't know.
Yeah, and I don't know of any kind of restriction like that would be in the Constitution, but certainly it's the prerogative of the legislature to change that. What I think is kind of interesting, and I think the reason that, from my opinion again, that this structure was set up this way was actually to keep the governor and the legislature from having to defend these issues of the regional planning, because they knew that these decisions would be unpopular, but by appointing a group, then both groups can point at this appointed group and say, well, it's their decision and we don't like it. And as long as it was just a moderate don't like it, I think everybody was happy with it and it moved forward, was okay. But I think I think their remit has gotten quite a bit bigger at the Met Council. I think they've expanded much more into things like housing that really bother people in the elected world and their constituents. So, I think if you seize too much more than you should, I think sometimes you get dialed back.
And cities and counties spend a lot of time on making sure that there is affordable housing, making sure that it's spread throughout the communities. We see it here in Egan in several instances where construction is going up right now. And along comes the Met Council and seems to focus, for instance, on rail and/or airports, and the local communities say, but bus transportation is what our people need, and bus transportation is what gets them to their jobs.
Right.
And you ignore bus transportation, speaking to the Met Council. And I think that also, is a fair criticism.
It's a good point, and I think a lot of the people, the counties in those suits that you're talking about, predominantly are counties outside of Hennepin and Ramsey, Dakota, that also feel like their needs, which are...
And Anoka, right.
And Anoka, they would describe it more in the surface transportation area, and particularly in buses, and they don't feel like they're getting enough attention as well. The just so we can round this piece out, back to the MAC for a minute. The Met Council definitely yields to the MAC on airport planning, but as part of that in the process, it's one of those things. But the MAC does that. The MAC's appointments are exactly the same as the Met Council, except a MAC commissioner has essentially 2 Met Council districts in their remit. So the 15 people that are on the MAC, the chair and all but 2 members are appointed by the governor, and they're appointed officials. And then there are 2 named, one by the mayor of Minneapolis and one by the mayor of St. Paul. So you still have the unelected doing that as well, and that group still has a taxation capability that group has never, MAC has never exercised anything in terms of taxation. And so you see almost 2 versions of the same model and how the reaction is to them.
And I think the Airport Commission, which has certainly come under a lot of criticism for airport noise and things like that, has been much more careful in, as you just pointed out, in how it utilized its power, and much more concerned with the local communities. Here we have these 4 counties who have hired a lobbyist representing both political parties, representing all persuasions, and they're going to Washington and asking the Transportation Commission, I think it is, to say, get these people off our neck. We want to do some of our own planning. And, you know, as a local person, seeing how conscientious our own community is in terms of these things, I certainly sympathize with that. And I don't think I'm that well informed on it, and I don't think most people are that well informed on it.
No, what they're going to
But
do is
you
read.
are.
Well, I'm maybe a little more well informed, but not fully like a Met Council member would be. But it's clear to me that I think you're right. I sit on the MAC, so I would tell you this: if I knew that some of the communities that we were responsible for in my district or in any of the districts felt the need to go to Washington to try to get our organization under control, I would view that as a failure of our organization. And I would want that to be remedied in terms of how our staff interaction is, how our board and commission interaction is with the communities. I think we should pay infinite attention to the communities we're in, the elected officials that are in those, in terms of these appointed commissions.
And what I see from them is belligerence, really exacerbating, rather than trying to soothe the local communities, that they seem to be almost challenging them. Well, we've got this power, we're going to do it, and too bad.
And so we see the result of that really is not very effective. And you'll also note that at least one, if not more, organizations, in this case I'll speak of the University of Minnesota, have, and actually also the Minnesota Public Radio, have in the past both had legal actions with the Met Council over the light rail line that went through St. Paul. And without saying anything about the status of where those are today, it is a failure when you have those entities going to court again. You know, you have 2 nonprofit entities in your state going to court against the organization that's supposed to be the regional planning authority.
And it results in a lot of additional expense. It results in delay. It results in litigation. It results in animosity and aggravation. And that seems to be counterproductive to really what the purpose is.
I think that's true, and I think that it's not that there isn't going to be disagreement, because there is, and that we get plenty of that with the airport as well. And I think it is our job to sit down and try to find the best possible solution and really understand the person's issues. And when you have entities going off to Washington to try to undo something, I think you've missed the boat.
And we do have needs. I mean, the Rochester to Minneapolis rail line would certainly be important. There are certain things that bus transportation can do on a more local level,
Right.
but that requires really getting together all the entities that are involved along the way, or the northern line coming down. I mean, it's a changing demographic, it's a changing world, it's a changing Twin Cities, and we know that the population is going to increase in the next 20 years or 10 years even, since
I'll
we
give you a
started
great-
talking about it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'll give you a great example. Over the years, we've had air service from the Twin Cities or from Chicago to St. Cloud, and it's usually not terribly affordable. And the way it is today, the last flights have pretty well been terminated from there. In general, there's not enough. The rail line that goes north is maybe 20 or 40 miles short of reaching St. Cloud. The rest of it goes right into the Target station. So one of the things you could do, even though it's outside their jurisdiction, but it is part of it, would be to work with the agencies like St. Cloud development agencies and figure out a way to make that connection so that, like you said with Rochester, you'd have high-speed rail between St. Cloud and Minneapolis, between Minneapolis and Rochester, and you'd eliminate the need for them to be fighting for more air service, because you could get air service in the Twin Cities, and then you could also choose to take a high-speed rail out
And
of.
sometimes high-speed rail gets you there faster because you don't have to worry about parking. It may pull right into the terminal, as it does at certainly here.
That's right.
From both terminals, as a matter of fact.
Right.
At the Minneapolis International.
So that-
Minneapolis-St. Paul International.
To me, that's one of those things where you'd sure like to see some activity, and all of the people, that's what the people want, so you're not even fighting anybody, really.
Yeah, and it's just, to me, needless. What's going on in the world of Thomson Reuters at the moment?
You know, the world, we have such a global footprint. We're around the world quite a bit, seeing what's going on. The technology is driving a lot of changes among the competition that we have. Technology is driving a lot of changes in the way our products can be delivered to our customers. Our customers are all out there trying to be as efficient as they can, and they're looking to us to partner with them with that. Our job really is to give them the best software and the best content to help them do their job better, and boy, do they want that more than ever.
And the world of practicing law is changing so drastically. We have seen, as a matter of fact, Mike Cerisi is going to be a guest here in a few weeks. And here's Mike Cerisi, who's one of the founders of Robbins Kaplan.
Right.
And now the firm is literally Robbins Kaplan, no more Miller and Cerisi,
Right.
because Mike went and left to form a boutique firm of his own. That's just a small example, but we've had large corporate law firms fold,
We've had
go into
folds,
bankruptcy.
we've had mergers. You have, in the world of finance and the world of law firms, you have a lot less people sitting in seats doing those jobs than you did 5 years ago. And the law firms and the financial institutions, which represent a good 2/3 of the Thomson Reuters business, are driving for their own economies. And law firms looking more like a corporation these days and acting like a corporation rather than a partnership, are driving to be efficient.
Now, how does that affect, say, Thomson Reuters in terms of personnel? I know you have offices in at least 40 countries, maybe more by now, but does it take less people to do the work that you used to do? And certainly you used to print here in this facility where we have this wonderful studio, 64 million books a year. That seems to have gone elsewhere. So how do
Well,
you deal with that?
The books, we still print double-digit millions of books, but not at that size anymore. That's declining. Every year we see a drop off. People still buy some books. We see around the world people are still buying books, but it's dropping off. So we have a lot more ebooks that we're selling. We have a product that we sell our book library on, so you can see it on an iPad. It's called a professional reader. It allows you to make notes, put post-it marks on, and when a new version of the book comes out, it takes all your marks and all your post-it notes and puts them on the new version. So it's very popular with lawyers. Not something you'd need reading a novel at home, but something that's very handy, as you know, from practicing, where you dog ear your pages of
Well,
certain
I
text.
can think back to the days, and we're going into the distant past, when I was practicing law, ready for some appellate work. First, you would find me in the library table, and the library was filled with law books, and I might have 20 or 30 books piled up, and we couldn't even bring a computer or anything like that in when it started into the courtroom.
Right.
Today, the lawyers sit there with their computers, their PCs, and if it's research, boom, they have it instantly. And with
I can
what
give them
you
their
people
whole
do-
U.S. codes annotated and all the Minnesota law on your iPad. And then you can also
Unbelievable.
search
and
Westlaw next.
in the New York office of what was West Publishing,
Yeah,
we had a whole cadre of editors who would work on the U.S. Code and the U.S. Code annotated. And today, that's probably one person in a closet.
not quite like that. We still have a lot of human editors going and doing great work that enhances, the product that's in the public domain. So it's still a big part of our offering, but it doesn't show up as much in print. So what I say is the whole production line looks the same, maybe more efficient by some technology, but at the end of the day, instead of ink on paper, it's pixels on a screen.
And probably much less space being utilized in the. So I would like to propose turning that into a winter dog walking park because it was brutal this winter walking our dog, and just the thought of being able to walk around this large premises.
I'll take
And
that down as another one of your spirited ideas.
We'll keep trying. We've been talking with one of our favorite guests, Rick King, the COO of Technology for Thomson Reuters, a man whose name is known not only throughout the state, but throughout the world. And where do you head next?
Well, other than New York and DC, which seems like home events, we'll be off to Zurich and London soon.
A little early for skiing, but maybe you'll get it in. I know.
No skiing on this trip.
As a
Hopefully we'll
Verm-
get some sun.
As a Vermonter, that's important to you.
We do like skiing whenever we can.
Rick, thank you so much.
Alan, great. Pleasure to be
pleasure,
with
always.
you again.